We've already seen that with our active track controller it's possible to change our offset from the view origin of the object selected. So just like before, I can pull back like this, and then maybe I can position myself over here. If I were to switch back and forth between these two up here, I'm choosing camera and now camera 1. It actually looks like I have only one camera out there and I'm just changing my view, but in fact there's two of them and I'm switching between their selected views. Well, what if I want to move one of these cameras to another location? Let's move camera 1 somewhere else. If the green controls affect my offset from the camera and my rotation around that object's center of rotation, then what about these white buttons? We haven't really talked much about those yet. Let's see what happens. We'll start with this one in the middle here, this big round one. I'll click it and I'll move it. Ooh, look at this. I'm moving away from the other camera now. Very interesting. So I can pull back now using the green buttons, change my orbit, and now I could show that I actually have two cameras. And you'll have to play around with these a little bit before you start to see how you can use them. But in effect, what these do is these are sort of a freestyle way of accomplishing the same exact thing that you could accomplish with the move tool. So if I click M for move, oh, I'm in the onboard camera, I can't use that. We go to the free camera. Well, first of all, I want to be able to see this selected object from the current position that I'm at. But if I switch to free camera, what's going to happen is it's going to take me back down here because that was my free camera view the last time. So clicking on board again and going back now to my camera 1, if I want to make my free camera position the same as my current onboard position, I use this button in the middle here, this one between free and onboard, and it's an arrow really. It's saying set the free camera to the onboard position. So if I press this button, it moves us to free camera, and free camera is now at this position as the onboard camera was. So now having done that, I can come in here with the move tool. I can press the M key and now I have the move tool. And then what I can do is I can move our object around here. So I'm going to first of all select O for orbit so I can get up above our camera symbol here a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and press the M key, and now I have the blue rectangle, which is the one which will allow me to move it basically in any coplanar area based upon the angle of that blue double rectangle. In other words, that's a plane that extends out to infinity, and I'll be able to move anywhere along that plane now. It's like this. So I certainly can come in and I can shift the orientation of my camera. I can move it around this way if I would like. But I can also use these controls to do the same thing. But this is sort of a freestyle way of doing it. And you'll have to play around with this a little bit before you'll really get it. So I wouldn't expect you to see exactly how this works right now. But by playing with these controls, you'll find that you'll be able to manipulate the positioning of the object itself, independent of its individual camera. If I go back to this onboard camera for this, you'll see that I moved back into the same relative position that I was in before. And now if I use these controls to move this around, I'm moving with the camera. So the offset is preserved as the camera is moved around in the set, as opposed to viewing whatever I'm doing from a free camera where I have a completely independent view. Let's go back to the free camera here. Let's see. You see, so now, though I'm looking at that camera, my offset away from it appears to be shifting. It's really not. As soon as I go back to the onboard camera, I'll go back to my original offset setting, which remember is controlled with these green controls here. Now that leads me to another issue having to do with cameras, or whether we're talking about onboard cameras for objects you've imported or for a camera that you've created. What if you want to track a particular object? Like, for example, if this Mini Cooper was animated right now, we might want to have a camera that keeps its attention on that Mini Cooper regardless of where it is in the scene as it animates. Well, you can also control that. Here, when we first created our camera, it created a default first scene. And because we have a scene down there, we have information down here in the scene editor that we can change. We could, for example, as we did in earlier movies, we could manually type in a red, green, and blue coordinate to precisely position this where we want it in our scene. And you may have noticed that there's a column over on the right hand side that tells us that there's an offset of 4.4 meters. It doesn't tell us exactly where in X, Y, and Z, or red, green, and blue space it is, but at least it tells us that the distance away from this is 4.4. But there's another track here in the middle, another column here, and this one is called tracking. And so what you can do is you can select any object in your scene from this. It's a drop down. You would know that from this little double arrow. You can click in here and it will give you a list of all the objects that you have in your scene. So if I were to choose the Mini Cooper, I'm going to let go of the mouse, and when I do, watch the symbol for the camera. It will rotate to look directly at our Mini Cooper. Now you may not have caught that because our offset, that is to say, well, yes, our offset from the camera would keep our view of the camera looking exactly the same, but in fact the camera is now pointing at the car. And if I use this green controller so I can kind of change my position here and let go of it, you'll see that it kind of caught up to itself and it's now looking right at the car. Now I'll move again like this, and as soon as I let go of the mouse, then it kind of shifts so that you can see that it's continuing to look at the car. If I zoom in on this and let go, it's looking at the car. And now I can change my view, like I'm going to move the camera way off here to the right, and then I'm going to let go, and when I do, as soon as I let go, it recenters itself on the car. So that is the way that you can get a camera to follow an object. And all you have to do is select the object down here for the camera. And what you'll notice is that later on, if we were to animate, let's say we were to animate our camera moving from point A to point B over the scene, then you might have multiple frames here that would be created in the animation. And we'll look at animation more here in a little bit. But when it does that, it will also, for each scene that it creates, it's this little blue block here is a scene. For every one of these that it creates, it will also add a row down here to the scene editor. So we'll look at that soon here. We're almost ready to get into the topic of animation. But I just want to make sure that you understand the way that things work as far as cameras go before we do that. So you can set up multiple cameras, and you can position those cameras using these controls, including this, which will change its elevation. Now I'm going to take this down really low here, and when I let go, it's got the car. Uh-oh, that doesn't look very good, does it? The angle on that is awful. Well, how would we fix that? Well, I could double click on the car, See, we're in onboard mode, so actually that doesn't work. I was in free mode. Let me show you. In free mode, if you double click on something, you'll center on it. If I want to center on this tree in the upper right hand corner, I double click it and our view moves to that. But that's with the free camera. The onboard camera, it doesn't do that. So how would I center on this car? I mean, how would I change my view orientation? Because you can see that we're kind of rotated here awkwardly away from being on a parallel view with the car. Well, first of all, let's go inside our camera here. Okay, now we can fix that rotation using these two controls here. These are kind of linked together. And if I grab this one and if I move it down a little bit, you'll see that we're actually starting to rotate. So I could try and rotate to sort of a parallel with that green line and let go, and you can now see that we're finding our horizon here. So I'm just trying to find the horizon. Let me back off from here a little bit so that we can watch it. You see what it's doing. So this is the way that you will kind of adjust its tilt using these controllers. Okay, I think we've spent enough time now talking about cameras. We'll come back to this subject later on, of course, after we've done some animating. But for now, let's move on to the next subject.